I just finished reading Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas, and it's been an experience. Like, this whole series was an experience like I haven't had in a long time. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Corey. I'm a content creator, aspiring author, and a fantasy book nerd, and this is my Throne of Glass series review. I won't make any secret of the fact that overall, I adored this series, and it will be one of my favorite series of all time, probably for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean that it's perfect, or that I don't have critiques, or that this series is for everyone. And seeing that it is 8 books long, it is quite an undertaking. Some of them are over 700 pages long. So I'm going to break down how I recommend you go about reading this series, and then I'll give you my honest opinion about what's good about it, if this series is right for you, and that way you can decide if you want to add it to your TBR list. But first, what is the Throne of Glass series about? So the first book, Throne of Glass, is about a young lady named Celaena Sardothien, and she's one of the most feared assassins in the kingdom of Adarlan, but she hasn't been a free woman since magic disappeared and her homeland of Terrasen fell to the king of Adarlan. So this first book starts off with her getting hauled out of a prison by the king's son, Prince Dorian, and the kingdom's captain of the guard, Kael, who offers her a chance at freedom if she wins this competition to become the king's champion. And what starts as a quest for her personal freedom becomes something much bigger as it becomes clear that some darker forces are at play than merely the king's ambitions to conquer. And what follows is this incredibly epic series with a ton of intriguing characters and romantic subplots as we follow our heroes around the land of Aurelia. Aurelia? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Okay, so first thing that people tend to freak out about when it comes to this series is the reading order. So people get a lot of anxiety over this because half of the advice you see claims that you need to read it one way, and then the other half claims you need to read it another way. So there are a couple components to this. The first being this book here, Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel to Throne of Glass. Some people say that you should read it first because that is the chronological order of events. But then there's other people that say you should read it either before or after Heir of Fire, which supposedly gives this book the most emotional impact. Sarah J. Maas herself has recommended this option where you read Assassin's Blade after Crown of Midnight, but before Heir of Fire. My opinion is it really doesn't matter that much. It doesn't matter nearly as much as people make it out to be. For myself, I read it before everything else. So I read it before Throne of Glass, and I'm really glad I did for a couple of reasons. One, I found that Assassin's Blade was the weakest book in the series because really it's a collection of, I think, 5 novellas, and it contains a lot of important background information, but the story itself is really just about how Celaena ended up where she did at the start of book 1. And by the time I finished Heir of Fire, I was definitely ready to move on to Queen of Shadows. I don't think I would have appreciated the detour into Celaena's past at that point. And the other reason is that I feel like I would have been a lot more confused at the start of Throne of Glass if I hadn't read this first, because Celaena mentions characters and places in passing. And if I hadn't read Assassin's Blade first, I wouldn't have known what she was talking about. So I feel like having all this backstory in advance helped me feel like I was going through these things with Celaena rather than wondering what was going on. Now, having said that, I can't see why some people would recommend reading it after Crown of Midnight for more emotional impact, because it kind of ties in a little bit more about what's happening in those next books. Because some of the characters talked about in Assassin's Blade, we don't really see again for a couple of books. But quite frankly, I'm glad I read it first. I really enjoyed the series this way, and if I had to do it again, I would have read it the same. Either way, don't let it paralyze you from starting the series because it really isn't that big of a deal. The second point of contention when it comes to reading this series is when you get to these 2 books here, which is Empire of Storms and The Tower of Dawn. And the question here is whether to read one book after another or to do what's called the tandem read, where you essentially read both of these books at the same time. And the reason why people recommend the tandem read is because both of these books happen at the same time, but in different places, and they follow different characters. And a lot of people also do it because Empire of Storms kind of ends on a cliffhanger that doesn't get resolved until the Kingdom of Ash. And then to read Tower of Dawn after that, for some people, feels like a bit of a chore. And also, there are a lot of people out there who don't really like the Tower of Dawn because it doesn't follow the main characters. And a lot of people don't really like the main protagonist in this book, but I would wholeheartedly disagree with that. In fact, I think this book is fantastic on its own. And the only reason why I would suggest doing the tandem read is because it really is epic to read through all these storylines at the same time. I do actually feel like it could have just been one big Ken Follett-sized book. However, some people do find the tandem read is overwhelming because it is a lot of content, right? So we're talking about reading nearly 1,400 pages together, and for some people, that's just a total non-starter. So if that's you, then don't sweat it. You can absolutely read them separately, and you really aren't missing out on anything. If you can swing it, do it. If not, no big deal. If you do want to do the tandem read, there are quite a few guides online on how to do it. Basically, you read a few chapters at a time, and then you switch to the other book. So I'll link to the reading guide that I used, which was from tlbranson.com. And then one last side note, if you are reading Throne of Glass on the Kindle, then you might be freaking out about the tandem read because you'll notice that the books are not separated Kindle files. It's just this one massive 5,300 page file for you to read on your Kindle. But you actually can do the tandem read very easily on the Kindle by making use of the bookmark feature. This is actually the way I did the tandem read, and I thought it was great. I thought it was actually easier than reading these two books, right? Because then you're not lugging these two heavy books around. But if you want a separate tutorial on how to tandem read with Kindle, just let me know in the comments. All right, moving on. So probably another one of the things that might be holding you back from reading this series is that a lot of people say that it takes a few books to really get into it. And honestly, that is kind of true. At least for me, I wasn't invested into this series until the Heir of Fire, or really the fourth book in the series if you count Assassin's Blade as the first book. And it really wasn't until this book where I was like, whoa, okay, this series has me. Now, that's not to say that these first three books are bad. They are not bad, but they're just okay, right? Like I gave all three of those books 3 stars, which is to say I enjoyed them. They were worth reading, but I wasn't screaming over them, right? But the thing that happens in these books is so important to what happens later on in the series. And so much changes over the course of these books that you end up looking back on some of these earlier books with a feeling of nostalgia. Like, I actually like those earlier books more now retroactively than I did while I was reading them. Either way, they are totally still worth reading. However, if you aren't chomping at the bit to go right into the next book after Throne of Glass or after Crown of Midnight, I totally get it because I was the exact same way. So what I did is I broke up this series with palate cleansing books in between each one for the first half of the series. But again, by the time I got to Heir of Fire, I was like, okay, I see what's going on with these books and I'm here for it. And then these last 4 books, so Queen of Shadows and onward, oh man, they are fire. I can't even choose which of those 4 books are my favorite in the series because I loved all of them so much and I gave all of them 5 stars. Queen of Shadows in particular has a special place in my heart because it's a real turning point in the series. The way that the characters change towards each other and their ideals and their goals, it was just really impactful for me. And then, of course, the tandem read was just pure magic. These 2 books are just sort of the peak of the action or the unraveling of everything that's going on in the kingdom and with these characters. And then this last one, Kingdom of Ash, was very, very long, but it was super satisfying. And it was just a really worthy end to the series, which I think for a series with so many books in it is a really impressive feat for an author to pull off. All right, so at this point you might be thinking, okay, you say it's good, but why? What do you love about this series? So without getting into any spoilers, I think for me it's partly because Sarah J. Maas is a master at kind of surprising you. Like there were some things that I definitely expected, but there was other things that ended up going in a totally different direction than I thought. And I loved almost all the characters. Like there's probably close to 12 primary characters in all of these books. And by primary characters, I mean characters that regularly or semi-regularly get their own POVs throughout the story. And there were only a couple of characters where I was kind of like, I can take them or leave them. The series also has this really epic overarching storyline, but it's very much about the characters and their relationships and how they grow and change throughout the series. And I eat that stuff up. Character development and really feeling like you're getting to know and understand these fictional people you're reading about is my favorite thing about reading. And almost all of them are just these really multifaceted, flawed characters that change throughout the series in profound and interesting ways. And of course, I really enjoyed the love stories in this series, although oddly, the main pairing is actually not my favorite. I can't tell you what my favorite pairing is because this is a spoiler-free review, so I won't name them, but I will say that they are the main characters from this book. And I loved how the story just was always moving. It was always fun, especially by the time you get to Queen of Shadows. There's just no real slow parts and you're just totally absorbed with every chapter. But above all else, I think the thing that really makes Sarah J. Maas's work stand out for me is how intentional and intricate her storylines are, in the sense that there are people and places and things mentioned early on in the books that you don't even really think are that important, but they come back later in the series and turn out to be really important. And for me, that makes it so amazing to read and even reread, because when I read through these again, I'm going to start catching little Easter eggs and these details that I missed the first time around. And not just with the Throne of Glass series either. This is the same with her other series as well. And I have so much respect for an author that knows what she's doing and where she's going with her series so far in advance. But is this series for you? Because as much as I'm gushing about it, I stand by the opinion that it isn't for everyone. For example, if you love lyrical, complex, Pulitzer-level prose, this is not that. Also, if you like minimal romance in your stories, this series is probably not for you. Now, there isn't a lot of romance in the first few books, but there's multiple love stories that develop throughout the series. At times, it's like a downright soap opera. Now, some people love that, others hate it. And if you hate it, then this series, and indeed any of Sarah J. Maas's books in general, are not for you. So that concludes my review. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.